Dear students, welcome to our learning community. We share medical education and MCQ practice to help you succeed in international exams. Each video is designed to build understanding, inspire success, and make learning enjoyable. Together, we grow and create a brighter future. Today's lecture, we will discuss the bones of the human body. The skeletal system is one of the fundamental components of a human body. It provides a structural framework that supports our body, protects vital organs, enables movement, and plays important roles in mineral storage and blood cell formation. In this lecture, we will systematically study the human skeleton, beginning with the basic organization and functions of the skeletal system, followed by the axial and appendicular skeletons. We will then examine the major bones of the skull, vertebral column, thoracic cage, upper limb, and lower limb. Finally, we will discuss several important clinical conditions involving bones, including fractures, growth plate injuries, osteoporosis, osteomyelitis, and bone tumors. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to identify the major bones of the human body, understand their anatomical organization, and recognize their important clinical relationships. 1. Introduction to the skeletal system. Let us begin with the basic question. What is the skeletal system? The skeletal system consists primarily of bones and associated connective tissues, including cartilage and ligaments. In an average adult, the human skeleton contains approximately 206 bones, although the exact number may vary slightly because of anatomical variations and differences in the fusion of certain bones. The skeleton performs several essential functions. Support. First, bones provide structural support for the body. They form the framework that maintains our body shape and provides attachment sites for muscles. Protection. Second, bones protect important internal organs. For example, the skull protects the brain, the vertebral column protects the spinal cord, and the thoracic cage protects the heart and lungs. Movement. Third, bones contribute to movement. Bones act as rigid levers, while skeletal muscles generate forces that move these bones at joints. Mineral storage. Bones also serve as important reservoirs for minerals, particularly calcium and phosphate. These minerals can be released into the bloodstream when required for physiological functions. Blood cell formation. Another important function is hematopoiesis, or blood cell production. In adults, hematopoiesis occurs primarily in the red bone marrow located within certain bones. Energy storage. Finally, yellow bone marrow stores fat and therefore contributes to the body's energy reserves. Axial and appendicular skeleton. For anatomical study, the skeleton is divided into two major parts, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton forms the central axis of the body. It includes the skull, vertebral column, ribs, and sternum. The appendicular skeleton consists of the bones of the limbs and the girdles that attach the limbs to the axial skeleton. This distinction is extremely important because it provides a basic organizational framework for studying the entire skeleton. 2. Axial skeleton. Let us now examine the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton forms the central supporting axis of the body and consists of three major regions: the skull, the vertebral column, and the thoracic cage. The thoracic cage consists primarily of the ribs and sternum. Together, these structures provide support and protection for the brain, spinal cord, heart, lungs, and other vital organs. 3. Skull bones. We will now move to one of the most complex regions of the skeleton, the skull. The skull forms the bony framework of the head. It protects the brain, supports the structures of the face, and provides attachment sites for muscles involved in facial expression, mastication, and head movement. The bones of the skull can broadly be divided into cranial bones and facial bones. Cranial bones. The cranial bones form the neurocranium, which encloses and protects the brain. The 8 cranial bones are frontal bone, 2 parietal bones, 2 temporal bones, occipital bone, sphenoid bone, ethmoid bone. A useful way to remember this group is to recognize that the cranial bones form the protective case surrounding the brain. Facial bones. The facial skeleton or visceral cranium consists of 14 bones. These include 2 maxillae, mandible, 2 zygomatic bones, 2 nasal bones, 2 lacrimal bones, 2 palatine bones, 2 inferior nasal conchae. Vomer. The mandible is particularly important because it is the largest facial bone and the only freely movable bone of the skull. Sutures. The bones of the skull are connected primarily by fibrous joints called sutures. Major cranial sutures include the coronal suture between the frontal and parietal bones, sagittal suture between the 2 parietal bones, lambdoid suture between the parietal bones and occipital bone, and the squamous sutures between the temporal and parietal bones. These sutures allow the skull to grow during development while providing strong connections between the cranial bones. Foramina. Another important feature of the skull is the presence of foramina. A foramen is an opening through a bone that allows structures, such as nerves and blood vessels, to pass. Examples include the foramen magnum, through which the brainstem continues as the spinal cord, and the jugular foramen, which transmits important cranial nerves and venous structures. Knowledge of skull foramina is particularly important in clinical anatomy and neuroanatomy. For vertebral column, we now move inferiorly to the vertebral column, also known as the spinal column. The vertebral column forms the main supporting axis of the trunk and protects the spinal cord. In adults, it consists of approximately 33 vertebral segments, although several vertebrae fuse during development. The vertebral column is divided into 5 regions: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. There are 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, and 5 lumbar vertebrae. The sacral vertebrae fuse to form the sacrum, while the coccygeal vertebrae generally fuse to form the coccyx. Cervical vertebrae. The cervical region contains 7 vertebrae, designated C1 through C7. The first cervical vertebra is called the atlas. The second is the axis. The atlas supports the skull, while the axis contains the dens, which acts as a pivot allowing rotation of the head. C7 is known as a vertebra prominens because its spinous process is usually prominent and can be palpated at the base of the neck. A characteristic feature of cervical vertebrae is the presence of transverse foramina, which transmit the vertebral vessels, particularly the vertebral artery in typical cervical vertebrae. Thoracic vertebrae. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae, designated T1 through T12. The defining feature of thoracic vertebrae is their articulation with the ribs. Their transverse processes and vertebral bodies contain articular facets for rib attachment. Thoracic vertebrae therefore play an important role in forming the posterior component of the thoracic cage. Lumbar vertebrae. The lumbar region contains 5 lumbar vertebrae, designated L1 through L5. Lumbar vertebrae are characterized by their large and robust bodies. This is related to their role in supporting a substantial portion of the body's weight. The lumbar vertebrae are therefore particularly important in clinical conditions involving the lower back and intervertebral discs. Sacrum and coccyx. Inferior to the lumbar vertebrae is the sacrum. The sacrum is formed by the fusion of 5 sacral vertebrae. It connects the vertebral column with the pelvic girdle through the sacroiliac joints. Below the sacrum is the coccyx, commonly referred to as a tailbone. The coccyx is formed by the fusion of several small coccygeal vertebrae, typical and atypical vertebrae. Not all vertebrae have identical features. A typical vertebra demonstrates the basic anatomical components shared by vertebrae within a region. However, certain vertebrae have distinctive structures and are therefore considered atypical. The atlas, axis, and vertebra prominens are classic examples of specialized cervical vertebrae. Understanding these differences is essential for identifying vertebrae in anatomical specimens and imaging studies. 5. Thoracic cage. We now come to the thoracic cage. The thoracic cage forms a protective framework around the organs of the thorax, particularly the heart and lungs. It consists primarily of the sternum, ribs, and thoracic vertebrae, together with their associated cartilages and joints. Sternum. The sternum, or breastbone, is located in the anterior midline of the thorax. It consists of 3 major parts: the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process. The junction between the manubrium and body is called the sternal angle. The sternal angle is an important anatomical landmark and corresponds approximately to the level of the second costal cartilage. Ribs. There are 12 pairs of ribs. They can be classified according to their anterior attachment. True ribs, ribs 1 through 7, attach directly to the sternum through their own costal cartilages. False ribs, ribs 8 through 10, do not attach directly to the sternum. Their costal cartilages connect indirectly through the cartilage above. Finally, ribs 11 and 12 are called floating ribs because they have no anterior attachment to the sternum. Typical rib anatomy. A typical rib consists of several important anatomical features. These include the head, neck, tubercle, angle, and shaft. The inferior border of the rib contains the costal groove, which is clinically important because it accommodates the intercostal neurovascular bundle. Therefore, when performing procedures involving the thoracic wall, knowledge of the rib's anatomy is essential. 6. Appendicular skeleton. We now move from the axial skeleton to the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton includes the bones of the upper and lower limbs and the girdles that attach them to the axial skeleton. The pectoral girdle connects the upper limb to the trunk. The pelvic girdle connects the lower limb to the axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is highly specialized for movement, manipulation, balance, and locomotion. 7. Upper limb bones. Let us examine the bones of the upper limb from proximal to distal. The upper limb includes the clavicle, scapula, humerus, radius, ulna, carpal bones, metacarpals, and phalanges. Clavicle. The clavicle or collarbone connects the upper limb to the axial skeleton. It articulates medially with the sternum and laterally with the acromion of the scapula. The clavicle functions as a strut, helping maintain the shoulder laterally away from the thorax. It is also one of the most commonly fractured bones in the body. Scapula. The scapula or shoulder blade is a flat triangular bone located on the posterior thoracic wall. Important features include the spine of the scapula, acromion, coracoid process, and glenoid cavity. The glenoid cavity articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. Humerus. The humerus is the bone of the arm. Its proximal end includes the head, which articulates with the glenoid cavity. Important features of the distal humerus include the capitulum, trochlea, medial epicondyle, and lateral epicondyle. The humerus articulates with both the radius and ulna at the elbow. Radius and ulna. The radius and ulna are the two bones of the forearm. In the anatomical position, the radius is located laterally on the thumb side, while the ulna is located medially on the little finger side. The radius plays an important role in movements of pronation and supination of the forearm. Carpal bones. The wrist contains 8 carpal bones arranged in 2 rows. From lateral to medial, the proximal row includes scaphoid lunate triquetrum and pisiform. The distal row includes trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. A useful mnemonic for the proximal row is, she looks too pretty. For the distal row, try to catch here, metacarpals and phalanges. Distal to the carpal bones are the 5 metacarpals, which form the framework of the palm. Beyond the metacarpals are the phalanges, which form the fingers. The thumb has 2 phalanges, proximal and distal. The other 4 digits have 3 phalanges each, proximal, middle, and distal. 8 lower limb bones. We now move to the lower limb. The lower limb is specialized primarily for weight bearing, stability, and locomotion. Its major bones include the hip bone, femur, patella, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. Hip bone. The hip bone, or os coxae, is formed by the fusion of 3 bones: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. These bones meet at the acetabulum, which articulates with the head of the femur to form the hip joint. The 2 hip bones, together with the sacrum and coccyx, form the pelvic skeleton. Femur. The femur is the longest and strongest bone in the human body. Its proximal end contains the head and neck, followed by the greater and lesser trochanters. Distally, the femur forms the medial and lateral condyles, which participate in the formation of the knee joint. Because of its large size and weight-bearing function, fractures of the femur can be clinically significant. Patella. The patella is a sesamoid bone located within the quadriceps tendon. It forms part of the knee mechanism and improves the mechanical advantage of the quadriceps muscle. It also protects the anterior aspect of the knee joint. Tibia. The tibia is the larger and stronger of the two bones of the leg. It is the principal weight-bearing bone of the leg. Its proximal end contributes to the knee joint, while its distal end forms the medial malleolus of the ankle. Fibula. The fibula is located lateral to the tibia. Unlike the tibia, it bears relatively little body weight. However, it provides important muscle attachments and contributes to the stability of the ankle joint. Its distal end forms the lateral malleolus. Tarsals. The ankle and proximal foot contain 7 tarsal bones. These are talus, calcaneus, navicular, cuboid, and the 3 cuneiform bones, medial, intermediate, and lateral. The talus is particularly important because it articulates with the tibia and fibula to form the ankle joint. The calcaneus is the largest tarsal bone and forms the heel. Metatarsals and phalanges. Distal to the tarsals are the 5 metatarsal bones. Beyond them are the phalanges of the toes. Similar to the hand, the great toe has 2 phalanges, while the other toes generally have 3 phalanges each. 9. Clinical anatomy. Understanding bones is not simply an exercise in memorizing names. Knowledge of skeletal anatomy is essential for understanding many clinical conditions. Let us briefly review some important clinical applications. Common fractures. A fracture is a break or disruption in the continuity of a bone. Fractures can occur because of trauma, repetitive stress, or underlying pathological conditions. Common clinically important fractures include fractures of the clavicle, distal radius, neck of the femur, and hip region. The anatomical location of a fracture determines which nerves, vessels, muscles, or joints may also be at risk. Growth plate injuries. In children and adolescents, bones grow in length at specialized regions called epiphyseal growth plates, or FIS. Because a growth plate consists of cartilage and is structurally weaker than mature bone, it can be injured by trauma. Injury to a growth plate may interfere with normal bone growth and can potentially produce deformity or limb length discrepancy. Therefore, pediatric fractures require particular attention to the location and severity of growth plate involvement. Osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a systemic skeletal disorder characterized by reduced bone strength and increased susceptibility to fractures. Common fracture sites include the vertebral bodies, hip, and distal radius. The condition becomes particularly important with increasing age, and prevention includes maintaining appropriate physical activity, adequate nutrition, and addressing relevant risk factors. Osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis refers to infection and inflammation involving bone. It may occur through direct introduction of microorganisms, such as after trauma or surgery, or through spread via the bloodstream. Common clinical features may include bone pain, fever, swelling, and local inflammatory changes. Early diagnosis and appropriate treatment are important to prevent chronic infection and bone destruction. Bone tumors. Bone tumors may be benign or malignant. Examples of primary malignant bone tumors include osteosarcoma and Ewing sarcoma. Bone can also be involved by metastatic disease originating from cancers elsewhere in the body. Clinical presentation may include persistent bone pain, swelling, pathological fractures, or an incidental finding on imaging. That brings us to the end of today's lecture on the anatomy of bones. Thank you for watching. If you found this lecture helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future lessons. Keep learning, stay curious, and see you in the next session.